All right, hi everybody. So today we are going into our second half of diet. So we're thinking about anatomical adaptations that different animals have that give them the ability to eat their specific food source. So where we left off though, was we hadn't quite finished going through some of the carnivory, or at least if it's not meaty carnivory, the animals eating other animals kind of carnivory. We were working our way through different adaptations that have to do with different parts of that process. We talked about adaptations animals have for like finding prey, pursuing prey. And then we spent a very long time talking about all different ways they are actually getting that prey. So we ended last Tuesday talking about filter feeding and all the amazing and very different anatomical adaptations animals have for filter feeding. And some of the cool evolutionary problems there were like a big whale and a big shark might both be filter feeders, but because of how they respire, because of their gills or their lungs, in the case of the whale, they have completely different ways of how they're going to get microscopic, tiny little things out of the ocean water into their bellies, which is really cool, right? Similar ecological roles, but their anatomy constrains how they do that thing. And so to keep on this thread here of like animals eating other animals, and then talking about ways animals figure out evolutionarily how to do similar things. This probably is the greatest example in all of mammalian evolutionary biology. But so a specialization some animals have is for eating really concentrated amounts of protein, really concentrated amounts of food. And so some insect communities, ants, termites, also things like wasps, bees, some insects put themselves into high concentrations. That then makes them, you can imagine, very ripe as a food source. And so throughout Earth history, and definitely in the modern, there's tons and tons of animals that have adapted the ability to go after this extremely rich food source if you can get it. So this big chimney over here is a termite mound in Africa that's like 8 feet tall. The mud is like concrete. The termites built that structure. It is their fortress. It is their home. These are all different mammals that have adapted to become specialists on things like ants and termites. So go ahead and talk to each other for a second. That question up there, what are some dietary adaptations these animals all seem to share?
Yeah.
Big logs. I think it's interesting when we came out of the article. Very good.
All right, what are some anatomical similarities that seem to be shared by the adaptations for their diet that seem to be shared by Calvin? Long tongue. Really long tongue? What goes with a long tongue, kind of? Long face? How's the teeth in these animals? Most of them have very reduced teeth. Actually, several of them have no teeth at all. So mammal evolution is almost like defined by teeth. The adaptations of mammals, the clades of mammals, they're all recognizable by their dentition adaptations. True here too, but in this case, the complete loss of teeth. The aardvark doesn't have any teeth. That anteater has this, look at this is the mouth. And this is how long the face is. So the dentary is running right here under the maxilla, but there's really tight skin. They don't open their mouth. The mouth only opens at the very end. There's no teeth in there. Okay, so long tongues, long face, no teeth. What else?
Their claws are a little bit chunkier than looking at
They all have on their forelimbs, on their hands, really substantial claws for getting into these insect mounds. They're also all, I would tell you, like relatively jacked to other animals around them. They have very, very, very strong pectoral muscles, very, very strong arm muscles. Their shoulder girdle is really well anchored. They have to sit there and try to bust into these really tough things. You guys might, the anthills we have around here in Pocatello are like sandy anthills. That's true. There are plenty of anthills like that, but especially in the tropics, insects can really insulate themselves with like, they turn that mud with their saliva and their feces basically into almost like a concrete. This is really hard to get into, but if you bust into it, you can get after it. The numbat is a marsupial. That's a numbat right there that has an anteating specialist. What I want you guys to really open your hearts to is the fact that like South America, Australia, Africa, Asia, just Africa, also South America. This is a Laurasiathere, Afrothere, Xenarthran, marsupial. These are all completely independent evolutions of the same suite of characters. There's differences. The aardvark has these hoofy things more than it has claws, but it still uses them to get into. You can see different sensory adaptations, great ears, great big nose on the aardvark, really reduced ears, reduced eyes on the anteater. So there's obviously different things happening here, but they all have converged on totally different continents, because those bugs are on all those continents, to really, really similar body plans. I think that is so cool. Some of these lineages are older than others, and they're even more extreme. So the anteater lineage is like pretty old. And so it's like a pretty highly adapted, highly specialized version. We can actually see that happening in nature now, where other lineages are probably adapting and maybe will look like this in like 20 million years. So this is the aard wolf. This is a African animal. That is a hyena. There are a few species of hyena in the world. The one you see all the time is the spotted hyena that crushes bones. This is the aard wolf, which is a hyena that has very reduced teeth, no teeth up front, and it has hilariously a really long tongue, but it's still a hyena. So it's totally possible that this animal that specializes on eating ants, even though it's a hyena, if you come back in another 20 or 30 million years, there might be a few of these like ant specialist hyenas that look kind of like these guys. That's fantastic. No objectivity there. So that's that. Let's talk about another specialization some predators have, this time another insect one. What about boring insects? So here's a woodpecker. This is a pileated woodpecker. This is one that we have here in Bannock County. There are plenty of woodpeckers all over Idaho. So talk to each other about this. This is a bird, just like any other bird, except for a bunch of insane stuff it does to get after bugs. So what are the adaptations a woodpecker has? Oh wait, I'll let you watch this while you talk.
It was very, yeah.
Probably.
Well. Okay, well, yeah, I mean, part of it actually a lot. So I kind of like.
So you might not know anything about woodpeckers. I'm not expecting you suddenly already know everything about woodpeckers, and maybe you've never thought about it before. What adaptations must this bird have? What kind of things are you guys talking about?
That's having something going on in its brain case to not give itself a concussion.
Is this slamming its face into wood all day on purpose? So yeah, there's fatty pads that help protect the brain as it moves around. Absolutely true. There's an entire muscular system that like comes up from the chest, goes back behind the neck to like let the head do this. It's kind of, they're not different muscles than other birds have, but they're way bigger than other birds have them to like make this happen. All woodpecker bills are chisel shaped, where the top bill is kind of pointed and the bottom bill is a little bit shorter and very flat. At the very tip, it's flat. So there's like a point and then a flat part. So they get in there and there's a difference in what's hitting the wood to get after it. Obviously, they have really interesting feet. They rotate one of their digits around to the back. So there's still 4 toes like a bird, but they have like 2 like this and 2 like this. So they can hold on to the tree like this. They all have really stiff tail feathers so they can like prop themselves against the tree. Right? And then do this violent thing and the tail helps them keep there. Here's like some interesting, this is that muscle I'm talking about that they have that comes up from their chest and roots onto the base of their, like the top vertebra, the first vertebra of their skull. There is padding there around the brain for sure. But one thing they also do is once they get into the wood, they're sitting there and they're like listening. They want to hear a little beetle larva or something inside the tree. So they get the wood out of the way. But then once the wood is out of the way, they might just see this little tunnel that this larva had like been crawling around through, had been eating its way through the tree. And so all woodpeckers have these really long tongues that they then stick into those holes. And at the tip of that tongue is all these little barbs. So there's woodpeckers that eat ants, there's woodpeckers that eat larvae, but they have like a little spear that they then shoot into those burrows to get those things out. That's a really extreme adaptation. Some people don't know this, but woodpeckers' tongues actually insert up around their brains and into one of their eyeballs. So the muscles for the woodpecker tongue go all the way like this. If you guys ever see a woodpecker skull, like in a museum or something, there's like a little ligament that goes up and then it usually goes into the right eyeball because they have to have all this space to keep that really long tongue. I don't know how it ended up going like that, but that is where it is, which is really crazy, right? That is an insane adaptation for getting into wood, holding yourself in that position. We didn't even talk about sensory stuff, and then pulling insects out of trees. This is very, very, very specialized anatomy. One of the great examples in the world of like pushing the idea of the analogous convergent discussion is this animal here. Talk to your neighbors if you've never seen this before. What do you think you're looking at?
Yeah.
So just starting really basic, in a basic and broad way right now. What kind of animal is this to even begin with? It is a primate. This is a lemur. So it's in a family all by itself. It's a lemur in Madagascar. Fun fact, Madagascar doesn't have any woodpeckers. It's a weird island, huge island off in the Indian Ocean, off of Mozambique, but it doesn't have any woodpeckers on it. There is a primate there, a lemur there called the ai. The ai uses procumbents, that means they stick forward incisors of its lower jaw to scrape wood and bark off of a tree. It's got big ears, it sits there and like listens to a tree, and then it hears a bug, it scrapes the wood away with its incisors. And it doesn't have a long tongue, it's a primate, but it does have a very gross, really long ring finger. So digit 4, very thin and very long. Same number of phalanges as you. So it's still just 1, 2, 3, but they're very, very long. The other fingers are all kind of normal lemur fingers. They're a little bit creepy. It's got the fingernails, right? It's a primate, so it's got fingernails like you have. But one finger all by itself is very long. And so once it finds that beetle hole, it can stick its finger into the hole and search with its long ring finger, just like a woodpecker does with its tongue. And so this is very interesting because the ecological niche space that this ai fills in Madagascar, these woodpeckers fill on almost every other continent in the world, are extremely similar. One's a bird, so it's got all this other anatomy. It's bracing itself with feathers. Only birds have feathers. This is a primate. It's using teeth instead of a beak to get under the wood. It's using a finger instead of a tongue to get after the larva. Really cool, right? Really interesting ways to solve the same problem of getting after larvae in the meaty part of trees. Do we love it? I do. I think it's great. Here's something that's even cooler. And now I'm just going to do a little quick dalliance out here out of comparative anatomy. So woodpeckers live on most continents, and I just told you that the ai lives in Madagascar. You guys are all biologists. At this point, I'm sure in your classes, you've come across the idea that islands are always a little bit crazy. There's always really interesting, fun things happening on islands. Islands can be treated as their own experimental places. Organisms that make it to islands often find themselves relatively alone in terms of like how many species are already there. And so interesting things happen on islands. A lot of the islands in the Pacific are more isolated than other places, but this is true for all the world's oceans. So you can think of there's woodpeckers here, and there's woodpeckers there, and there's woodpeckers there, and there's woodpeckers there. Out in the middle of the Pacific though, where there aren't woodpeckers, other birds have figured out ways to do this. They do not have anatomical adaptations, but instead they use tools. So in this island, New Caledonia in the South Pacific, there is a crow that has to work pretty hard to make a hole in the bark. But then this crow uses a stick to try to spear out the grubs and the larvae. It doesn't have a long tongue, but it uses a tool to basically do what a woodpecker does. The classic example, of course, is in the Galapagos, where these finches do everything. You guys have already met one of these finches that's like a blood drinker. Everything you learned in intro bio about these finches is all about how big their bills get when they eat seeds, and a lot of them are eating seeds. But some of these finches are blood drinkers. This one is called the woodpecker finch. It also finds larvae in the tree and then uses a cactus spine. It flies to a cactus, breaks off a spine from the cactus, and then uses the cactus spine to try to stab out the larva. So these two birds do not have anatomical adaptations that let them do this, but they have behavioral adaptations that let them do this, and they're doing it on islands where the much better competitor who already might be doing this isn't there. So cool, so fantastic. All right, that's enough bug stuff, unless we have any questions about bug stuff. So we were talking about attack. This was all prey capture. Here's one of our last predator slides. This is about prey handling. Special anatomical adaptations organisms have to handling the prey once they have the prey. So go ahead and take a minute, talk to your neighbors about any prey handling that's happening on this slide.
Get all the information right there.
Yeah.
All right, can somebody volunteer to tell us about one of the ones you've been talking about?
I was talking about how like most cats are pretty meticulous about what parts of the animal they just killed are eating, like they'll take their time kind of picking it apart.
Oh, that's true. Predators always like, yeah, they're gonna eat the good parts first, right? Birds really like to go for eyeballs first, right? These things that happen. That's true. So choosing what you eat, you know, that like the really tough meat, like up in the hips, that's what's gonna be there on day 6. But you ate that liver first thing, once you killed that zebra, for sure. So this leopard is a carnivorous mammal. It has carnassial teeth, which means a premolar and a molar paired on each side of its mouth that act like shears, they act like scissors. And so if you guys have a cat, all cats do this, where they might grab with these canines, but when they're actually eating, they're going like on the side of their mouth because they have their scissors on the side of their mouth. Those are special molars. All carnivorous mammals have that. So that sea otter has those same teeth. In the sea otter, they are not shears, they are crushers. So the sea otter does all these, of course, cute things where it floats on its back and it keeps its food on its stomach and it just lays there and uses a rock sometimes to crack stuff open, but it's still using its carnassials to bust into that crab claw that it just ate. A lot of dental adaptations. Those piranhas all work as a group. They all take single bites to shred off a piece. This great white shark on this dead whale, these teeth are very serrated on each side. So a great white shark just kind of bites and then goes like this with its head. And because the serrations are on the side, it gets off that big old piece of meat. I should have got a picture where there's like a hilarious like bite right there because then it's really clear to see. Those teeth are adapted for that purpose, grabbing and then shredding. Obviously the pelican's got a ridiculous throat extension. Ouch, that huge fish in there. And then of course, maybe the greatest example of prey handling is things like snakes, which have no hands and really reduced teeth relative to like something like a cat or something like that. Not reduced, but just like they're not particularly huge teeth. Those teeth are like hidden by the gums, but they're still there and they're still pointing. So everything the snake does has to do with skull mobility, where it can like totally let its jaw bones separate out from each other. It has those bones of its palate you guys have seen now a few times, and they can make those bones move. Those bones have teeth on them. So it can swallow something like a big mammal, even though it's just a meat tube itself, which is really, really, really incredible and really cool. A couple prey handling specializations I wanted to emphasize. A totally different hyena. So hyenas are predators, they catch meat, they eat meat like any normal predator, they're not only eating bones by any means. But hyenas are one of the only animals on the landscape that can get nutrients from bones. So they have these carnassial molar premolar set, like any carnivore and mammal would, but they have them as like these very, very, very powerful teeth that are wide and crushing, and then huge jaw muscles. So hyenas can break the ulna, break the humerus of the zebra and get the marrow on the inside. The lion can't really do that very easily. The musculature and the teeth from the hyena is letting it access nutrients that, like, maybe the lion made the kill and the lion's now left. You can get stuff from the skeleton. That's really cool. There are other ways to be a bone specialist. So this is a vulture from Asia and Europe called the lammergeier. It's also called the bearded vulture. I like the lammergeier. It's a great name. So this is a bird. Have you ever seen this bird before? This is a carrion bird. So it looks for dead animals. And what it does is it eats bones very much as a specialist. It picks up individual bones. It has no crushing teeth. It has no powerful muscles to do that. It's a bird. It's a big bird. So what it does is it picks up bones and then flies really, really high with the bones. You can watch videos online if you don't know about this. It's really fun. And it'll fly up the mountain until there's a place that it really likes. It's covered with rocks, and then it just lets the bone go. And then when the bone hits, it might break or it might not break. And if it doesn't break, picks it up, flies up really high again, drops the bone. What the lammergeier does have, that the hyena doesn't have, is that its stomach is like extremely powerful acid, like dangerously powerful acid in its stomach. So once it breaks the bone open, it does just throw the pieces back and lets its acidic stomach like dissolve out the bones. So now we're getting into adaptations that animals might have, not on the outside of their bodies, not for sensing or detecting or capturing or pursuing, but actually processing food. And so this is how we're going to transition into our plant eaters. We're really talking now about the digestive system. So we were talking about all kinds of different adaptations that had to do with other body systems were all related to diet. Now we're going to get into some actual adaptations of the digestive system. So your digestive system starts with your mouth. Like your lips and teeth are the very, very front of your digestive system, and it ends all the way down here at the back, right? There's ways food is broken down in your mouth. In you have this, probably to you guys familiar, tube within a tube, right? We're all bilaterians. We all have our 3 tissue layers. So this tube within a tube, this endoderm system, goes to your mouth, goes down to your stomach, from your stomach to your intestines. It's where your intestines are where actual nutrients are absorbed up into your body, where the actual taking in of the powerful parts of your food happens. You're chewing and dissolving in your mouth. Your stomach is doing some acidity and some dissolving. You have all these accessory organs, your liver and your pancreas, that are helping with different parts of your food breakdown. What's really interesting is that most vertebrates, this is a turtle, share almost all the same parts that you guys share. So there's just these adaptations that are like enhancements or reductions or emphases on different parts of that organ system that can tell us a lot about an animal's diet. So a turtle doesn't have teeth, of course, but it might still process a little bit with its beak. It does have a stomach, it does have a spleen, it does have a pancreas, but maybe its intestines or its guts are much shorter than yours, or much shorter than other animals. So comparative anatomy is really interesting, of course, once we get into organ systems. I don't think I'd be doing my job as, like, in theory anyway, your anatomy professor, if I didn't like at least show you a chart like this. Go ahead and just take a second, talk to your neighbors about what you're seeing on this chart.
Yeah.
All right, so there's a lot of words up here. Some of these words have prefixes or really suffixes, I guess I should say, that maybe you guys are like, I know what that is. So can everybody walk us through a little bit, just like one or two examples of something that's happening on this chart? This very, very simplified, human-specific chart of digestion. What are we looking at?
Showing which organs do what, like how do they digest foods and what enzymes are doing it.
The word enzyme, right? Use the word enzyme. So all these things that end in ACE, these are all these different enzymes, right? So the ability to break down, in this case, like break down proteins that are going to digest these different kinds of organic molecules you might bring into your mouth. It comes into your mouth as a fork full of chicken pad thai, and then it ends up in your stomach as different sugars, really simple sugars, different amino acids, the very simple proteins, some of the fatty acids your body can really take in. So that's all happening in your intestine, and different parts of your body, different parts of your digestive organ system are using different enzymes to get after very specific parts of that digestion. You are not breaking down lipids in your mouth very well at all. You might chew it up a little bit, but that fat that you're eating is going to end up being digested down here. Some of the sugars, though, you put in your mouth, eat a peep next month. That's going to be a good one, actually. If you eat a peep next month, some of that sugar is going to start to dissolve right away in your saliva. So the point being here is just these all happen at different parts within your system. Enzymes and all that. I, of course, want to focus on anatomy, but like I said, I feel like a view like this is always important because otherwise I just end up showing you woodpeckers and sharks the whole time. So these are foreguts. These are foreguts of animals. Foreguts mean the beginning of the digestive system. So not the mouth, but like the esophagus, the stomach, maybe a little bit of what's associated with the stomach, but not the rest of your gut, which is called the hindgut. That's like the intestines and all the things like that. So these are comparative foreguts. You guys can see the names of all these different animals. They're all sort of like scaled to be the same size, which of course isn't true in life, but it's showing you different things, different parts of the specific anatomy of the foregut. Non-glandular epithelium, you could think of this as like, just like a really expanded surface area. Here's you, the different regions of your stomach. You don't have to worry very much about what these names are. I think you know esophagus though, the top part of your throat right before it enters into your stomach. So there's the different parts of the anatomy of these animals. What I really care about right now is that you all make some comparisons with just this, almost the color coding and the shape information you can see here about all these different animals and questions you might have from this comparison of the foregut, beginning really of the internal digestive system. All right, Dr. Jelly, what about this?
Yeah.
So
Eating meat.
All right, so what are some observations we can make or questions we might have looking at these foreguts? Remembering that there's still a whole bunch of intestines after this, but it's just foregut.
I don't know what each animal might eat.
Okay, so you're like, okay, I think I know what these eat, and then, sorry.
And then you kind of like, oh, they shark, giraffes, salamander, turtle eat a lot more like carnivorous things, organs.
I think that whole top row with like maybe the alligator is like pretty funny, because it's just like, I think you guys all would agree that a turtle and a shark are pretty different, but that first part of like their like terminal esophagus and then their stomach into their intestines is pretty similar, pretty simple, truly the tube within a tube. All right, what other things?
a lot of other herbivores have the non-glandular epithelium which helps them like. Not all of them are ruminants, obviously, but they do digest like for humans, undigestible polysaccharides.
So they're eating kind of plants like this. Here's something that's helpful. These animals are all obligate herbivores. If I put green squares around the obligate herbivores that only eat plants, talk to each other again now about this.
Yeah.
All right, so what are some things we can say about herbivores?
Their stomachs more horizontal.
Oh, interesting. So like maybe within their body, there's more of like a turn. If I actually am not 100% sure, but if this is oriented, they're all oriented the same way. There's a bit of a happening. Okay, what else?
That's just what we were.
That's what you're talking about? So like maybe the positioning of the stomach. I guess that makes sense. I wish there was like arrows on this because I don't know if that means like the shark's pointing up or something. But anyway, what else? Yeah, Franny.
Nothing else in that chart that has it except for the humans. So it's, I don't know what the cardia is, but is it like a mechanism for,
Actually, I truly don't know what the cardia is either.
maybe it's a special mechanism where it can digest cellulose?
I'm almost certain it's a muscular part of the stomach, but we are omnivores. And so we have a lot of the adaptations, that's true. How about the shape, just like the general shape of these guys? Poor guys. Yeah, AJ.
So I just looked up cardia.
What is it?
It says part of it is a valve that keeps things from coming back up.
Okay,
And then the other part of it is just like a liquid. It's the part of the stomach that's close to the esophagus.
yep,
Food and liquids pass through the cardia to enter the stomach from the esophagus. A valve near the
that's true
cardia
for us. That's a human wrote that,
keeps stomach contents from backing up into the esophagus.
right?
So I guess where you see like the card, like the black, especially the rumen llama, it could be like a valve.
Between,
Where they have different chambers to their stomach.
how about something as simple as that? There's chambers in some of these herbivores. There's a lot of complicated shapes. Whereas the snake is kind of a pass through. The echidna who's just sucking down ants is just kind of a pass through down to the intestines. So some of these herbivores have multi-chamber stomachs, different geometry of their stomachs, these broader structures, different emphases on different parts of the anatomy. So yeah, maybe the cardia is, I knew it was a muscular thing. So I'm obviously something in my brain remembered it was like a valve, or at least something that controls, God, what do you call it? Gastric reflex kind of stuff. For humans, that's true. But in something like this ruminant or this camel, this llama, there's a huge amount of the stomach before that happens, but after the esophagus. Yeah,
So I kind of mentioned already that the non-regular, I mean, it's like where non-digestible stuff is processed.
but us, our non-digestible stuff, yeah.
We can't digest it, and I don't think a lot of herbivores can either because they have bacteria that
Right, but they have chambers in their stomach for the bacteria, right, to do it.
and all the herbivores have cellulose, and all of the other ones that also have non-regular have the other human non-digestible, which is chitin in their diet.
So you're saying that like that whale is eating krill maybe, and that echidna is eating bugs, and that the arthropods they're eating have chitin in their exoskeletons, that's undigestible to us, but maybe they have the ability in this part of their stomach to digest the chitin. Cellulose is a tough material that's in plants, and maybe these animals are digesting plants. We cannot digest cellulose, it passes right through our systems.
Yeah.
You might be totally right about that. That is extremely interesting to me. And again, this is like the beauty of comparative anatomy. You can like take something like this and then use it to ask questions. A whale and an echidna sharing a chitin digesting part of their stomach. I have no idea if that's true. That's now I'm really interested because you might be totally right about that. So here's our phylogeny of vertebrates that you guys have seen 100 times before. The big groups. Keeping in mind what we talked about on Tuesday with heterotrophy, so having to eat other things to get your nutrients, no animals are autotrophic. And then once you're heterotroph, carnivory is pretty widespread. Here's the distribution of herbivory amongst the big clades of vertebrates, and that's about as sloppy as I can make it. Herbivory has evolved in some of them. And then the frogs have a tadpole because it's only, or sorry, has an asterisk because it's only true of their tadpoles. It's not true of the adult. There's no herbivorous adult frogs. All right, talk to each other about the distribution of this trait, eating plants amongst vertebrates.
That's really hard. No, and also English.
So what do we think based on like this tree, the ancestral dietary condition is for vertebrates just generally? Yeah, carnivory. I just think it's almost as simple as that. What I really want to like burn into your brains is that herbivory is the derived condition. Herbivory is the specialized condition. Tons of times, our world is pretty covered in green stuff. Tons of times, different animal groups have evolved herbivory. In all of these clades, there's turtles that are herbivores. Multiple times turtles have evolved herbivory. Multiple times birds have. Multiple times mammals have, of course. But each time is an evolution away from like through an omnivorous stage, probably to an herbivorous stage. And so then we can compare amongst different groups of the evolved condition of herbivory. We can get at these incredible patterns of evolution, this incredible predictive ability to understand why things like this would happen. But in all of these groups, you know, you guys are talking about, I think I heard you guys talking about like, it's a fox is our placental mammal logo. The fox isn't like, some foxes are herbivorous. That's not what I'm saying. That's some placental mammals. But even amongst carnivorine placental mammals, there's plenty of herbivores. Panda being the fun example, where like, there's these murderous bears. There's 7 bears on this planet, and one of them eats grass all day. And so that is a derived condition, that herbivorous condition amongst bears is only the panda. There's some omnivory everywhere else, but the panda is an herbivore. So I'm not trying to say foxes or geckos. Some lizards are herbivores, some turtles are herbivores. I think another cool pattern is like, there's no herbivory in adult frogs. There's no herbivory in salamanders, like at all, really. There's no herbivory in snakes. They don't do it. There's no herbivory in modern crocodiles. There are, of course, a couple amazing crocodiles from the dinosaur times that absolutely were plant eaters, which is really cool. But that's kind of the default. No herbivory, no herbivory. There's no herbivorous sharks or stingrays. They don't do that. That's cool though, right? They've been around for 400 million years. None of them? I guess not. That's cool. Here's a little list I threw together. I bet it's not perfect, but just for you guys to think about it. Within these bigger groups, here's the times that herbivory has evolved for sure. And then we can make comparisons between these groups. So diprotodontians, if you don't remember, marsupials, diprotodontia, that's like kangaroos, koalas, wombats, possums, not opossums, possums. Tons of birds have done it, tons of mammals have done it. Some lizards have done it, some turtles have done it. A whole bunch of teleosts have done it, but no non-teleosts. Every picture I chose to go on this slide is an herbivorous vertebrate that is absolutely not related to any other that has an herbivorous common. It doesn't have a herbivorous common ancestor with any other. It's a pika and a wallaby, a sloth, a minnow, and a parrot, and a Eurymastix lizard, all enjoying their plant-based diets. But again, here's that panda all by itself. Again, this happens a lot. And so Cass was really onto something. Part of our biology that people are coming to understand more and more and more and more is our microbiome. So your microbiome, you have one, every organism has one, is the full ecosystem of microorganisms that exist on your body. So that includes your skin. This is a figure that's showing some of the most important parts. So inside your mouth, inside your skin, urogenital system, of course, is a whole bunch that keep it healthy and functioning. But the biggest, most diverse, without question, is your gut microbiome. And we're learning a lot more about how gut microbiota absolutely affects other aspects of human health. You can imagine, of course, that that's true for all organisms, not humans that only have like their microbiomes off and now they feel sick or there's something bad, they're developing some sort of syndrome. That is going to be true for all organisms. And so the microbiota is a very, 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 very up and coming area of study for biodiversification and the radiation of different diets on this planet. We need to understand what those microbes do because they are absolutely important for digesting certain things. Like was said, mammals, any vertebrate, cannot digest cellulose, which is like a tough material in the walls of plant cells. You cannot digest it. Bacteria, though, some of them can. And so animals like cows have this population of bacteria that do all that work for them. Yes, they get all the sugars once it's all broken down, but the bacteria that they're hosting, the billions of bacteria that they're hosting, actually do that work. So that's like hardly anatomy, right? What is anatomical is that cows, and we're going to talk about it, have special chambers in their stomach where those bacteria live and do that work. But it's still just like you're hosting a bacterial farm in your body. It's really cool, right? So before we get into talking about a lot of specific herbivorous adaptations, I wanted to make some observations and have you guys talk about actual plants, like what we mean when we say herbivory. These are photosynthetic organisms, autotrophs. Organisms, they're all eukaryotes, that are photosynthesizing because they have something like a chloroplast, usually a green chloroplast, but there's other kinds of chloroplasts, to let them do that growing, making their own food from sunlight. So here's 4 completely different categories of photosynthetic autotrophic organisms that you might find in a lake or in the ocean versus what you find on land. So talk to each other for a quick second. If you're a vertebrate in the ocean versus if you're a vertebrate on land somewhere, what are the differences at all for you about being an herbivore to begin with? All right, so what are some differences between aquatic environments and marine environments and land environments, terrestrial environments, when it comes to photosynthetic autotrophs? Yeah.
We were talking about how, like trees and weeds after the plants on land are probably harder to digest than like the soft, simple plants that are planted in water.
So soft and simple structures, maybe in aquatic environments for the most part. Okay, interesting. Well, yeah, I would agree with you that like the wood of these trees is relatively hard to eat. I think that's probably accurate. But what else is going on land? Yeah.
I think there's a little bit more diversity on land than in the ocean in terms of plants.
I think there is a unbelievably lot more diversity on land. I think if you guys go back to that phylogeny, all the times herbivory has evolved in some are tetrapods. None of the fishes. There's a couple teleos, and guess what? Those teleos are freshwater teleos that live like in the Amazon or something like that. They live in a place that's almost terrestrial because they're in 10 feet of fresh water in the middle of the jungle. So plants are a land dominant thing, especially, I mean, there's a green plant clade that we could actually say, like, you know, true plants are land organisms. And so much of what makes plants plants, not the roots, not the wood, not the leaves, that's getting nutrients, that's gathering sunlight, that's their structure. Once you get past that, everything else that these plants are doing, especially like cones and flowers and fruits and nectar, those are all actual evolved plant adaptations to be eaten or not be eaten, to interact with animals. The coevolution of many different plant lineages with different animals, a lot of it insect, but also plenty of vertebrates. There's tons of evolution happening. There's tons of dietary specializations happening here. When you get into the oceans, yeah, that phytoplankton is like single cell and it's the basis of the food chain. But like you guys already saw, the thing you actually want to eat if you're in the ocean is like the krill, the small little invertebrates that are eating the phytoplankton. You don't eat the phytoplankton. There's a few land plants. You guys know if you jump into a lake and there's seaweed that touches your foot. But that's like not a great, that's not like some incredible source of food. And there's actually not a lot of vertebrates that eat the red and the brown algae. There's some, but these are mostly eaten by invertebrates, things like crabs, urchins, that then vertebrates eat. So there's not a lot of herbivory in the oceans. There's really not a lot of like massive plant material in the oceans like there is on land, right? That's really different. So an example of, though, aquatic eating of plants would be algae. Algae is easily the most common thing. Algae grows like a carpet in areas where circumstances allow algae to grow. So that happens a lot. When we talk about freshwater, or in this case, a couple saltwater fishes that are algivores, and there's some frog tadpoles, these are what they're doing. Algae is like usually pretty small. It grows kind of as like a film. Most of the animals we see that are algae specialists have like disky kind of mouths. They go around and they scrape the algae into their mouths. So it's kind of like almost they have the mouth of a snail that goes around and scrapes a surface clean. And so algae is absolutely a great food source in the ocean. These beautiful reef fish, those surgeonfish, they are algal specialists. They keep the reef clean of algae, and the coral, which is an animal, keeps growing really well. Very rarely, there's one example of a terrestrial animal that's an algivore. You guys probably have heard of it before. This is a marine iguana from the Galapagos. So iguanas, of course, are squamates, they're lizards. It's a land animal. It's one of the most recent additions to this giant category of animals we would call marine tetrapods. So tetrapods have gone back to the oceans. Marine iguanas' obligate diet is to go down, dive to the bottom of the ocean off the Galapagos, and then they use their very reduced teeth at the very front of their mouth to just nip off algae from the very bottom. It's there. It's a great resource if you can go down to eat it, so they do. It's not a lifestyle I think I would choose. But you're absolutely right. There's way more plant diversity on land. There's so much more plant diversity on land. So let's talk about plants, and we'll start with the easy one. Animals that have to eat leaves or that do eat leaves for their diet. We call this folivory, the foliage. You're eating the foliage, eating leaves. But before we talk about the animals, and we're going to do this for each of these different categories, I want you guys to think of the plants as actively evolving organisms under selective pressure. So talk to each other. You're a plant. What is a leaf? And what do you guys imagine the different selective pressures are on leaves if you're a plant? Okay, talk to each other, please.
Yeah.
All right, so what is a leaf? If you're a plant, what is a leaf? It's one of your organs. What are they doing with one? What'd you say? It does the photosynthesis, the green part. It's your solar panel. It's your food gatherer. So what are some selective pressures that are going to be on leaves?
How to absorb sunlight better?
And how do you maybe absorb sunlight better? Surface area. You want to be big, 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 big. How come all the trees outside don't have leaves that are like 14 feet across? You were losing water through your leaves, part of your photosynthetic process, you have to let in carbon dioxide through your stomata on the underside, the non-solar side of your leaf. And so you don't want to lose too much water. Also, if you're really big, wind damage, these are delicate structures, they're your photosynthetic structures, right? They're delicate structures. They also, are pretty much right there to be eaten and grabbed by other other organisms, in this case, animals. Most predation on plants, which is a funny word to say, but it is how people talk about it. Most predation on plants is absolutely just insects. But animals that are vertebrates absolutely eat plants too. And leaves are a pretty common source of food for tons of vertebrate herbivores. One thing plants can do is like fill their leaves with toxins or things that make their leaves unattractive to eat. They can't pull their leaves in or anything. They need to keep their leaves out to absorb sunlight. And so a lot of what plants do is have their leaves be relatively nutrition poor, because you can imagine if they were full of sugars and seeds and things like that as a leaf, just gonna gobble them up. So relatively nutrition poor, and they fill them with things like toxins and poisons so that animals don't eat them so much. So that's what the plant's doing. If you're a vertebrate, how do you deal with that? There's a lot of ways different herbivores have learned to deal with that. What are these completely non-related to each other vertebrates doing after they eat a whole bunch of leaves? Yes, it's as simple as that. Those are nutrient poor food sources. Those leaves are photosynthetic cells, they're solar panels, and you're eating the plant's solar panels. It's full of water, it's full of cellulose, it's very low in nutrition. New leaves, like when a bud is forming, animals gobble those up. It's all the proteins, all the nucleus, like of each cell is like there, but it's not all full of water and starch yet. So it's like still a little buds. So you go to see when leaves are growing, a bird will go around and just eat all the buds, because that's the time to eat all the leaves without having to deal with all the stupid water and cellulose. So there's all these different animals, relatively small body, arboreal, living in trees. When they eat leaves, because that is going to take a long time to digest all that stuff, they have to just cool down. Totally similar ecologies because of their leaf eating. There are other ways to eat leaves. You can just be humongous. Dinosaurs, of course, a lot of dinosaurs did this. Elephants and rhinos, cows do this today. You just throw it down and you have such a humongous gut full of different chambers, bacterial endosymbionts, that you just digest it for a really long time. And that's how you make eating leaves worth it, is because you are running it like scale. You are doing a lot of it all at once. That's really interesting. The other thing that really only a lot of mammals do is really efficient digestion. And that process I'm talking about of digestion starts right here in the mouth. We're gonna have a lab in April all about these animals. Intense adaptations to chewing and food processing, destroying the structure of that leaf, breaking up that cellulose, breaking up those cell walls as best as you can in every single stage of your digestive tract. So teeth being a really great example in that deer. Grasslands are one of the most expansive habitats on this planet. Grasslands, obviously it's named for the plant that dominates it, are all made of very tough leaves. All these little grass shoots are little leaves, and they're super tough. They are resistant to predation. Grass leaves are full not only of cellulose in all plant cell walls, but there's actually silica crystals, mineral crystals in blades of grass. When you run your finger on some grass and it kind of hurts or is jagged, there are just like crystal spikes in grass, because grass doesn't want to be eaten. And so animals that do eat grass have very intense adaptations. This is like a tooth. This is like a tooth you would have, has a crown, has a root. There's the enamel, there's the dentin. It's like a human tooth. It's called brachiodont. It's a low crown tooth, a short crown tooth. This is what a horse tooth looks like. So it's really tall. It's eating tough food. It's going to be worn down all the time. The enamel and the dentin, those hard tissues that are in the tooth, are staggered. So there's some dentin and some enamel exposed up at the top. And then as that horse chews, those enamel ridges wear down slower than the dentin ridges, and you always have tough ridge structure on your teeth for grinding. There is a horse's jaw in cross section. If you cut away the bone, those teeth are always coming out because it's eating a diet that's basically full of glass, these silica crystals that are grinding down its teeth. Other animals, this is a rodent jaw, like a gopher jaw or a mouse jaw, that are also adapted to grasslands, also have insane molars that grow forever and have different ridges of enamel on them, because they are also eating grass, and grass is also totally wearing down their teeth all the time. So one way to digest efficiently is to process the food with your teeth. Super, super, super hard, but that's a huge investment. Grass is obviously an amazing thing to eat because it's really easy to get and it's everywhere. There's a big cost to being a grass specialist. Your anatomy is really severe. Other things that you can do to digest efficiently is do this thing that Cass was talking about, where you have in your stomach, here's the 4-chambered stomach of an animal called a ruminant. So ruminants are things like cows and sheep, antelopes, giraffes, deer. They have multiple chambers in their stomach where very different digestive processes happen. One of the most important of those processes is in this first chamber called the rumen. That's where you have endosymbiotic bacteria that are breaking down the cellulose of the plants that you're eating. And then, while that's happening, the bacteria are doing their work, you keep spitting food back up into your mouth to chew it some more. So a lot of animals in this group do this thing called chewing the cud. You guys have heard that, I'm sure. Chewing the cud is when you like have some plants that have been in your gut for a while, you spit them back up into your mouth and chew them some more, swallow them again. So efficient digestion is one way, and you can see there's adaptations in the teeth, adaptations in the soft tissue, like the stomach here, for making sure you're getting the most out of your plants. Grass is a great thing to eat. It's pretty hard to eat. I want to talk about 2 different ways mammals have evolved grass eating abilities. So this is a white-tailed deer. That is a horse. I'm using a picture of a zebra because it's more fun, but it's the same thing. There's 2 different ways you can do that endosymbiotic digestion. Deer and other things that are like, cattle and antelope, they have foregut digestion. So that means in their stomach, there's special chambers for breaking down plant material, the foregut, the beginning part of the gut. Horses have hindgut digestion. So after their stomach, there's parts of their intestinal area that have extra chambers. They're doing extra digestion that other animals aren't doing. So hindgut fermentation can happen, great chewing teeth in the mouth. Foregut fermentation can happen, great teeth in the mouth. But for the foreguts, they can spit food back up into their mouths and chew it some more. There's extremely specialized teeth between these 2 animals. We call the horse's teeth lophodont molars, crested teeth. And we call the teeth of things like cows and antelopes and deer selenodont. So it looks like a moon. That's what selene means, moon teeth. Or these ridges of enamel, ridges of dentin. Special adaptations for getting after grass. So a really classic example of evolution and herbivory in the animal record is this evolution of grass eating amongst these different groups. So here's a phylogeny of Laurasiatherian placental mammals. None of these you need to worry about eating plants right now. So a question you might ask if you know that a deer does something and you know that a horse does something is, where does the prolonged digestion of cellulose evolve? So those extra spaces in your gut to digest cellulose. Where do grass grinding molars evolve? So go ahead and talk to each other. If you were to put on the tree where those 2 features would go, where would you put them on the tree? All right, so maybe somebody who hasn't said anything quite yet, where would we put the red tick mark that says prolonged digestion of cellulose, or the red tick mark that says grass grinding molars? Yeah.
We said grass grinding molar before ungulata, and then possibly like prolonged digestion could be, because they're 2 different, they do it different ways, could be separate tick marks for each.
So maybe prolonged digestion here and here, because you're saying they're doing it in different ways. Okay, anybody else have any other thoughts on that? Changes? Agreement? Yes, Andy?
You said that we also think that the molars evolved independently because they're different.
So maybe the molars, because the molars have different shape, it's possible that they evolved independently too. So it's true that both of these animals have prolonged digestion of cellulose, both of these animals have grass grinding molars, but the way they do their digestion and the shape of their molars, and keep in mind selenodon and lophodon are like human made up words to describe those teeth. They're not like great truths about teeth. We decided to call them selenodon and lophodon, but we call them different things because they are reliably identifiable as different. You can find a little broken fragment and know if it's a horse or know if it's a deer. So different shapes for the teeth, different kinds of the digestion. Obviously, they're both functionally doing the same thing. So there's other possibilities here. What other kinds of information could we add to this to get after this question?
You could look at the fossil record and see what it says.
You could look at fossils, that's true. What else? Right now, you're looking at a deer and a zebra.
The DNA of the, like, the microbiome. And compare that.
I guess you probably could. I feel like that's such a new science. I wonder what that would tell you. Because that's like thousands of species of bacteria. But that's an interesting idea. I'm like intrigued. Right now, you're looking at a deer and a zebra. Yeah, let's add some more ungulates in there. Of course, you know, I'm gonna say, of course, look for the fossils, but it's even easier than that. You don't have to like go to Nebraska and find like 30-million-year-old deer. You can look at other animals, right? So let's add some more. You guys know that these are artiodactyls and parasidactyls. That's the phylogeny of like even more ungulates. That piggy, that antelope, the bison, and then that tapir. It's fun that they're both black and white, but that's just a coincidence. There's the distribution of foregut digestion. There's the distribution of selenodon molars. There's the distribution of hindgut digestion, and there's the distribution of lophodon molars. So now, all four of those observable characters, where would you put those on the tree? They don't have any of those four features.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no arrow to the pig because the pig doesn't have any of those four things. All right, so where are we gonna put these four features now that we have a little more information? Where are you gonna put lophodon molars? Or you about the lophodon molars evolved? The horse is the only animal on this phylogeny that has them, so I think a pretty safe hypothesis would be like lophodon molars. All right, what are the other features?
Hindgut would go for proof back one.
So parasidactyls having hindgut digestion, Cass says, what else?
Or gut digestion would go like after the pig.
After the pig, so here. What about the selenodon molars?
That too.
Same spot, love it. I think that's what I would say. Oh, I'm supposed to put this up, sorry. And of course, that's where those features go. These animals here are all part of a clade that has evolved the same, they have inherited here, their common ancestor, evolved these specialized molars and this foregut digestion for eating grass because this lineage here went out onto open grasslands. There's other animals we could add too to make this even more fun. Hindgut digestion is true for all these are all herbivores too, for the most part. But all these herbivorous parasitactyls evolved hind-gut digestion, but only the horse lives out on open grassland. The tapir lives in jungles and eats leaves and fruit all day. But the like big soft plant leaves like from a tree, whereas the horse is out there eating grass all by itself. It's the only, one of the only parasitactyls that's out there in the harsh grasslands next to the bison and the antelope, things like that. And so what is very cool, of course, we could go back into the fossil record, and what's great is the earliest parasitactyls and the earliest artiodactyls are all forest animals. Grasslands as ecosystems didn't evolve until about 30 million years ago. I'll stop after this. Grasslands evolved about 30 million years ago. And so different mammal lineages have adapted to grasslands. And they have convergently evolved a functional similarity in how they eat grass, but the way they do it is completely different because the grasslands came after they already had diverged. I think that's really fun. All right. I want to just make a quick point though, that grass isn't only on land, grass is also in the oceans. One of the only flowering plants, an angiosperm, that lives in the oceans is seagrass. And so seagrasses are tropical grasslands that exist in shallow oceans. You can think about it as like pretty much a normal grassland, except it's under whatever, 10 feet of beautiful clear blue water. And so there's lots of animals that are in there. These rays are absolutely not eating grass. They're looking for crabs and snails to crush with their ray jaws. But you guys probably know there's plenty of animals from herbivorous lineages that like live out there on those grasslands, and what they eat is that grass. So this is a sea turtle that is almost completely an herbivore, and it specializes on seagrass. Here's a dugong, one of these sea cows that's out there feeding on seagrass. This is the Lachnopterygian, it does not care about the grass. It's hoping the dugong scares a shrimp, and it will eat the shrimp. What I like to think about though is when you see a footage or video or a photo of these animals, tetrapods eating grass, they're just doing it 10 feet underwater. You just have to imagine that they have friends on land that are their close relatives doing the exact same thing. And these are just marine versions of those two animals. And I just think that's really special. Okay. I'm sorry you have to see these pictures right now. Let's talk about another plant specialization. Flowers exist, of course. One of the things that a flower has in it is nectar. So just like we did with leaves, if you're a plant, what is nectar and what are the selective pressures on nectar? Pretend you can't see those pictures because I messed up. All right, what is nectar?
Bait to get animals to.
Oh, look at this. So yeah, it's like a sweet, sugary liquid. It's, Addison is of course correct. The pressures on nectar, it's bait. It's trying to get an animal to pollinate. It's turning, in this case, you guys can see the kinkajou. So sorry, you can see the kinkajou. The kinkajou is being like offered, yes, some food. The plant does not care about the food. The plant cares about the fact that the kinkajou's face is covered in pollen, and then it goes to the next flower to take another drink, and it pollinates. So this is a part of the pollination syndrome. Flowers themselves are usually what attract insect pollinators. Nectar also attracts insect pollinators. But there are plants that get pollinated by vertebrates. And so this is part of the plant's reproductive arc. This is the early part. This is fertilization. So sperm and egg stuff, pollen over to the next flower. So what are some pressures that are going to be on nectar? Should every flower have a gallon of nectar? Like, yeah.
Well, obviously, like amounts important, but aren't there flowers that do other things to selectively choose pollinators?
Oh, for sure. Like, there's like flowers that intentionally, like their whole flower looks like a female bee, so that the male bee will get excited and come over and mate with it. It's just a flower. That one has no nectar at all, because the enticement is like female bee. So yeah, that happens. But nectar is something specific. There is an incredible amount of really amazing evolutionary science on like the trade-offs that plants have to make, because if they make too much nectar, everyone's gonna be like, oh, sweet, and just like drink all day and break the flower, rip them open. A lot of bugs cheat and go under and just like pierce the nectary and don't do the pollination part. There's a lot of really interesting things. This is just my only time in this whole class where I'm trying to be like, hey, you guys think about how crazy plants are. They're trying to make this happen. They want to give you some so that it's worth your time, but not give you too much, because why would I give you more than I have to? So nectar is just one of these things that's like very cute and fun, but it's like one of the most like hardcore natural selection, like drop off threshold things you can study. So here's an example of a mammal that is a pollinator. Supposed to hit it that now. Here's a kinkajou. What do you notice with the kinkajou's anatomy? Yeah, it's arboreal, so long arms and legs, very slender body, runs around in the trees, but yes, it's a big nectar drinker. So smashes his face into those big trumpet flowers, covered in pollen on that fur. The plant's probably happy, the kinkajou looks like it's probably happy too. That long tongue is a great adaptation for mammals that are drinking nectar. Here's a marsupial pollinator from Australia. You love it. Honey possums are diprotodons, so they're related to kangaroos and things like that. They are not some other kind of marsupial. They're related to koalas and kangaroos. And there's also a lot of bat pollinators out there. What do you notice about those bat pollinators? Again, with the long tongue, a lot of them have that nice long face. So this one has a really long tongue. This one's actual face is really long because it can get its face down in the flower really, really far. So these are just like inherently cool things. Mammals that are pollinators have that fur on their face that obviously gets covered in pollen, and they have this great relationship with these plants. Probably the best example in the world of nectarivory are these animals, which do live here. Right about the time you guys are taking your final exam is when they'll finally show up for 2023 in Pocatello. So these are some hummingbirds. Just for a quick second, talk about hummingbirds and how ridiculous they are. Hummingbirds are a really beautiful example of your anatomy, your actual day-to-day life, what you live with anatomy being pretty extremely constrained by your diet, right? So what's the first thing we notice about hummingbirds? Long bill. Crazy long bill. So this is the swordbill hummingbird, and there's the skeleton. Look at that keeled sternum. There's all the breastbone muscles. Because all it does is hover with its teeny little arms. And then there's this little furcula. It's got all the normal bird features, but tremendously long bill, bony bill. What's cool about hummingbirds though is that just like all the mammals that pollinate, inside their bodies, all wrapped up in there, they do have really, really long tongues. Something you guys might not know about hummingbird tongues is they have a split in the very end of them and hooks on the very end of them. And so when they plunge their tongues deep into the nectary of a flower, their tongues split and wrap, and they're able to pull it like huge droplets of nectar, like relative to how teeny their tongue really is, to get the surface tension of the nectar to stay on these different wheels and go down this groove in their mouth. So when a hummingbird is sitting there going, woo, woo, and it sticks its tongue, it's going like in and out very quickly of the nectary. And each time its tongue is doing all these extreme things at the very tip to bring in all that nectar. Hummingbirds do like run on sugar, like that is a funny thing to joke about, that is true. But a lot of them also do just like catch bugs when they can. And certainly baby hummingbirds are fed like on bugs. So they're not just like sugar water all the time, always. Anybody know where hummingbirds live? If you were to describe to somebody where you're gonna see hummingbirds? Migratory, yeah, fine. They're in the Caribbean, they're in Idaho, where else? Hummingbirds are American animals, North and South America. They're New World animals. They do not live anywhere else. They're only in North and South America. So what does that mean for places that absolutely have flowers that are called like Africa and Australia and Asia? Is that they have their own birds that are nectivorous birds. So honey eaters live in Australia, sunbirds live all over Europe and Africa and Asia. They have relatively long beaks and they have long tongues too. They're all specialized for their different flowers. Those are songbirds, both different kinds of songbirds. Hummingbirds are their own kind of thing. A point I want to make, because what we have like a minute here. I just love it so much. This is convergent evolution, just like the aardvark ant-eating thing. These birds are all specialized on flowers, drinking nectar, similar suites of anatomical adaptations in order to do it. Here's the one point I want to make before I let you go. That's where hummingbirds live. That's where honey eaters live. This is where sunbirds live. So of course, out there in the insane place, none of those animals live. So what happens? In Hawaii, that is a finch. That's related to like a goldfinch or a pine siskin that you might see in Idaho. But in Hawaii, where there are none of these nectar specialists, one finch species has evolved this face to eat the nectar of Hawaiian plants. I think that's really fun. Okay, we'll stop. And I will see you guys for more dissections on Monday.